Have you ever been to a wedding that was just so beautiful, so elegant, so one of a kind and trend setting that you thought to yourself, I'm going to steal every bit of this? What's the law that's going to prevent you from doing that? Today on the podcast, how can event designers protect their work? Stick around.
This is the Wedding Industry Law Podcast, a podcast dedicated to wedding professionals that are just trying to keep it legal. And now, your host, Rob Shank.
Hey out there, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Rob. I'm going to be your host for this particular episode where we are going to be talking about the idea of protecting event design. And what I mean by that is the protection of the aesthetics, the visuals, the look and feel of a wedding if it's unique to the designer. So is that something that the law is going to be able to protect? And if so, how? But before we get into it, I have a call to action for you. Please, if you are enjoying the Wedding Industry Law Podcast, by all means, like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. Mosey on over to our YouTube channel. Watch the podcast there. It is available at Wedding Industry Law on YouTube. And while you're there, leave a comment. If you have any suggestions for content, please let me know. I try to address all suggestions in future episodes. So today we are, again, like I mentioned, we're talking about event design and whether or not the concept of event design is something that's protected under the law. But we are not doing that alone. We have a fantastic guest who has such an interesting, actually a few interesting areas of law in which she practices. Her name is Leila Amineddoleh, and I'll say that 4 times real fast. So Leila has nearly a decade and a half of experience in both litigation and transactional law. She is an expert in the field of art and cultural heritage law. She represents major art collectors, museums, galleries, dealers, nonprofits, estates and foundations, and foreign governments. She's been involved in matters related to multi-million-dollar contractual disputes, international cultural heritage law violations, the recovery of stolen art and antiquities, complex fraud schemes, authentication disputes, art-backed loans, and the purchase and sale of hundreds of millions of dollars of art and collectibles. So she's kind of like, I don't know, like the Indiana Jones, Laura Croft of the legal and art world. And we're so happy that she is here today to talk about intellectual property and protection of event design. Leila, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me on today.
Can you just kind of tell us in a general standpoint, like what, we don't have to go too far into it, but what are kind of the categories of intellectual property? How do they kind of work? And then we can get into the actual how they would possibly apply to event design.
Sure. So there are 3 areas of intellectual property. One is patents, and patents protect inventions. So if you invent the light bulb, you get a patent for that. So it's really about functional utilitarian objects and invention. Trademarks are logos. Really, you're protecting your name. So a great strong trademark is like Coca-Cola or Nike. It's either the name, the logo, the combination of 2. So it's protecting your brand. Trademarks protect the brand. And then the 3rd category is copyright. And it's kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's this right to copy your work. So when you write a book, you get a copyright. You're the only person that has the right to print, to publish, to distribute that book. And copyrights used not just for books, but also for films, posters, photographs. So when we talk about IP, it's generally those 3 areas. In terms of weddings, the area that might have some overlap is trade dress, which is a type of like trademark where you protect your brand, you create a distinctive kind of brand or dress or mark for yourself. And think of trade dress like with restaurants, right? Taco Bell has a certain look. It's not just the name Taco Bell and that image of the bell, but the look of their restaurants, like what the buildings look like, or Wendy's. I don't know if you remember, if your listeners remember how Wendy's used to look maybe like 10 or 15 years ago. was that building with like the red roof that had that like particular shape, and the sign had a shape to it, and the seats inside had that red color. So that's all a trade dress. You're building this brand. So that, I think that's going to come into our discussion today.
Right. And I'm so glad that you mentioned Taco Bell because that's my favorite place in the whole world. So, but
Well, I
yes, like,
mention it because I have a 3-year-old who's never eaten at Taco Bell, but she recognizes it because we drive by a Taco Bell, and now every time she sees a bell, she says Taco Bell.
Taco Bell.
It's a
Well,
really strong brand. I
that's a
know it's
beautiful
strong.
thing. That is
Yeah.
a beautiful thing because the Doritos Locos Tacos changed my life. But anyway, yes, you're exactly right. So the trademark and trade dress is, not just the logo itself, but like the feel and look of the actual location. Now, you walk into a Taco Bell and I'm trying to think because our Taco Bells are in a state of transition. They're trying to be more elegant, I guess. But
Yes. It's happened up here in the Northeast. All the Taco Bells around
yeah,
here, they've changed their design, and it is sleeker now. And
yeah,
actually,
it's like walking into a Starbucks that serves tacos. Yeah,
yes, they look really nice now.
right. Yes, as opposed to like I guess it was like an Adobe kind of like Southwestern design you walk into. But anyway, we digress. So okay, so you mentioned that it's trademark of the three buckets of the patents, the copyrights, and trademarks of intellectual property. That would probably be the most likely avenue for a wedding designer, a wedding planner, a wedding coordinator, not coordinator, but a design artist to protect their unique style. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit?
Sure. So, I was thinking about how to protect items, or protect a wedding. There might be individual elements that can be protected by a pen. Let's say you created something for a wedding, and Rob, I know you and I had mentioned, when we had chatted prior to recording, we had talked about coming up with a patent for like a new creation you built, a type of altar that's new, that's novel in some way. So there's like individual items or individual aspects of a wedding that might be protected by patent. But if you're thinking about the look of an entire event, something that's unique that a wedding planner could have created, it would be trade dress. So there's one case that I had found. So as a lawyer, I wanted to get a little legal here and see if there were any cases on point. And I just found one. There's only one that I found in my research and it was a case in Texas. There were two different venues. One is, I have the names, one is Sparrow Barns and Events, and the other is the Ruth Farm. And they're two different wedding venue locations in Texas. I think they're within 90 miles of one another. And Sparrow Barns created a barn, this barn venue that's unique in its look. It's all white with these bright windows, these chandeliers, and just the architecture was kind of unique. And the whole feel and look was a sun-drenched white barn. And what had happened there is that they were they were creating this design, and representatives from the other barn, Ruth Farms, came and visited, and they took a tour of the venue. I guess they represented themselves as people interested in hosting a wedding. So they went, can we have pictures? They asked a lot of questions. And then they actually they veered off the course of the tour and went into like the construction site to see the plans and to see what was happening. So of course, Ruth Farms goes ahead and basically copies. They use the same architecture, the same white space with sun-drenched light. And actually, if you want me to share my screen on Zoom, I can show you the two venues. I have images here.
Oh,
somewhere.
that'd be awesome. Yeah, absolutely.
So let me find these. They have the two images back to back. I know I found this here. Here we are. So I will share my screen so you can see the two venues.
You should be able to. Like, I'm not sure Zoom's
Oh, it's
protocols here.
disabled right now. I don't know how you have to fidget around with things, but if you allow me to share my screen,
Okay,
I can show you.
Let me try this. Allow participant to share screen. Okay, so you should be able to now.
Perfect. Great. So here we go. So you could see that. So this is information about the court case. And in the case, obviously, as part of evidence, there were images of the two venues. So you see White Sparrow on the left-hand side. And the images are a little difficult to see because they're in white.
Mm-hmm.
And it's against a white screen. But you could see that there are these two venues with kind of these arches with light coming in, sun-drenched room. And if these images were a little better, these are from court exhibits, you would see that the chandeliers are very similar. The way the two venues had advertised as well. So on the left-hand side, you see a picture of a sparrow drenched in light in the doorway, and the nest had a couple in the doorway.
Right.
These are very similar.
Right.
So I can stop my share now if you would like.
Yeah.
So they really copied, and there was evidence that there was this copying, and White Sparrow applied for a restraining order to stop Ruth Farms from doing this. And the court looked at the two venues, and the court actually did say that there would be this confusion, that White Sparrow could protect its trade dress. It was this unique venue, this unique space. So I think that's why this case is the case, and the space is unique, which is why the case is unique. Because I don't know if there are that many wedding venues out there that are this distinctive. When I think of a barn wedding, like a farm wedding, where I actually got married in Pennsylvania, and it's a really popular thing to have a farm wedding. Usually you see these red farmhouses, and there's nothing that distinctive about it, right? They're just red farms all over the country.
Sure.
But in this case, it's something really unique. So White Sparrow was able to protect this site, this venue.
And I'm sure you might not have read the petition or anything like that, but like it was based on trademark dilution, like it was a trademark issue.
It was based on trade dress. Yeah, it was this trade dress that they had created, something that was unique and that would lead a consumer to confusion. Right. So one of the hallmarks of trademark law is not only are you protecting your own logo, your own company, but you also protect the consumer. You don't want the consumer to be confused about the origin of the goods. Mm-hmm. So if you have a dream of a White Sparrow wedding, Ruth Farms can't come along and try to confuse the consumer and say, no, we do the same thing. Well, you don't. Really, the origin is White Sparrow. You cannot confuse the purchaser, the buyer, the consumer.
Right. And I think probably definitely in this case, there is no question of intent.
Oh, yeah. And it was easy to prove as well, right? That they came in, they took the photos, they asked questions, they visited twice. Mm-hmm. So they came for the first time, did the tour, and then they came back with their follow-up questions. Mm-hmm. So they definitely had access to this space. They had this intent. Caused confusion. So I think it's a pretty clear case, but it's pretty rare, I think, as far as events. If you think of a wedding as an event, it's difficult with events.
Right. And that's what I was going to ask. Oop, am I getting a little feedback? And that's what I was going to ask is that, okay, so this is definitely interesting in terms of if there's any audience members that are venue operators, this, if you have a unique enough venue, then absolutely that can be incorporated into your trade dress and could be protected if somebody wants to, especially maybe in this instance, they might have been one of the best venues in town. And so everybody wants their special sauce. So if you're one of the, the best places in your town, you're really unique, you might be able to protect it, not necessarily based on this particular case, but the idea within this case. So what, in terms of this episode and for event design, the people that actually are, maybe they're not necessarily using the same venue. So it's not a venue example, but what are some of the concepts that come out to you based on this case that would be applicable to an event designer that's not just using one venue every time? Like, is there any, I guess for me, we talked about maybe if there's a designer that they wash the whole event in a particular shade of purple. Or perhaps they, every one of their events is always lined with champagne flutes that are in a certain shape, or some I guess if I understand correctly, if there is a unique concept with the design, then the coordinator might be able to do it. Is that a fair statement?
So you mentioned two examples that I think are interesting. The first is color, and it's been possible for designers to protect a color. And one of the colors, one of the most famous cases, is Tiffany blue. So Tiffany, the jewelry company, is able to protect the use of that color on like jewelry boxes. But it's taken years for that color to be associated with Tiffany. Same thing with the Christian Louboutin shoes. That red sole has become kind of synonymous with the designer. But again, it's taken years. So a designer could arguably do that, have a color, become associated with that designer, with that wedding planner, but it would take a long time. It would just take time for like the public to associate that color with a designer. And with weddings, I don't know if that is really that practical, because I think about trends in colors, right? Like with weddings and the different design palettes. So it's possible. Let's say it's a wedding wedding coordinator who's worked with well-known celebrities, and they use like a blush pink, and everyone wants that designer. That over time, perhaps that could be something protected, but it couldn't just be that you can't use that color for an event. It would have to be something specific, like using that color on boxes, or using that color on some type of like altar, like a wedding altar, or what wedding, I don't know, what would you call it? The front where people get married. I know I got married under like an archway.
Yeah, I
Um,
think that's fine. Archway, altar.
yeah.
So if I understand correctly, then the protecting the idea of a design, number one, it requires whatever that concept is to be recognizable to the public as being from you,
When
right?
it's something as vague as like a color, if you're talking about a design like an architectural space where White Sparrow went and built something, they had an architectural space designed, and then they used colors in it with like windows placed in a certain way, then I think that's a little different than just using like a color and saying, hey, I can now protect that color. I think it requires a little more than just a color.
Right,
Uh,
right.
you need to have some level of recognition. But I think another way for designers to protect themselves is really to protect themselves, right? Like to protect their logo. So I am like wedding designer X, and they really build a reputation as, professional, as being creative, as designing spaces for an individual, for working with well-known clientele. And that is something a designer can definitely protect. I am, I don't know, John Smith. And I mean, maybe that's actually that's too generic. Could you pick a name that's a little more unique? Use my name. I have a
Right.
really unique name. I'm Leila Amineddoleh. Like, and I am known for this. I built this reputation, and now you can't come and try to steal my logo. So on my business cards, I have my initials, the LA, in a certain script. And I have a website that is unique. And you can't falsely advertise that you're using my services if you aren't. So it might actually just be the designer, him or herself, that can protect his or her name rather than trying to protect a color.
I think that makes sense. Like if you want to begin the process of protecting you and your brand, you start with the trademark concept of your logo, of your, the trade dress associated with your website, these type of things. And then if you're the cream of the crop and you're so unique and your events are so unique, then you might be able to walk into the territory of protecting the event design itself. But that's a little bit, as we've talked about, going to be far more difficult, if not impossible, versus just trademarking your logo. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think so. I think you really have to build a recognition to say this color is associated with me. Because when you think about these color cases, it's Tiffany. It's,
Hmm.
I mean, one of the most well-known jewelry companies in the world. So, because if we allowed everyone to go in and say, "Hey, I've used pink, this shade of pink, for this many years," then really, what colors can you use any longer? So, I
Right.
think there is this kind of hurdle to reach, this recognition. You need to have a brand recognition in order to protect something as kind of general, or it's kind of as vague as a color.
Right. 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 And one more thing before we let you go. Then, so if the I guess on a scale of it being easier to protect the event design to it's very hard to do it, the more unique aspects of your design that are associated with you, the longer you've been doing it, and the more that no one else is doing it, that's going to make it easier to protect. So by way of example, not just, as you mentioned, not just a color, a special color, but maybe it's a color on a box that has a particular shape that the guests get, or it's, like I said, like you always have wedding flutes in a particular shape, or I mean champagne flutes in a particular shape, or um, the way you make the couples enter is a particular direction or or way, the altar shaped, and all these things combined, if you do them all over a certain amount of time, is going to make it easier for you to protect that, potentially, at least based on the same concepts of the one case we talked about at the beginning.
Yes, definitely. Because I mean, protecting a wedding, there's some aspects of a wedding that everyone really takes part in. And weddings have been occurring for centuries. So to come up with something unique, I think, is a challenge.
Mhm.
But if you can make it really unique where it hasn't happened in the past, then you have a stronger possibility of being able to protect it. And so I remember I got married in a vineyard, and that's not unique. It was kind of like it's something that's been popular, especially the past decade. It was a vineyard. I was under an archway. In order to make it unique, think of the designer, like the wedding planner, would have had to come up with something very specific, like you said, a very specifically designed, unique box with a color and a shape, or arranging the champagne bottles or champagne flutes in a different way, maybe even unique types of glasses, right? It's like it's really with anything that you think about common goods. So in order to get like some type of protection for a household good, like a plate, for example, it needs to be unique in some way. I just recently saw this and I think it was just such a wonderful idea. It was a plate. Like imagine you go to a cocktail party and you have your plate that you're holding in your glass, and you really can't eat anything if you have a fork because your hands are full. There's a plate, and I should buy these because I think they're wonderful. It's a plate, and on one side there's kind of a hole in the plate, like on the rim of the plate, and you can actually insert your like champagne glass or your wine glass into there. And they're specially designed glass and plate that go together. Such a wonderful idea. But that really is unique.
That
Otherwise, it's hard to get some type of protection for a plate. Maybe a copyright on the design, on like the pattern that you're using. But really, how else are you going to protect a plate?
that's right. That's such a good idea. I never thought about that because, like, I used to wait. I mean, I waited tables for probably 15 years. So like when I'm at a party, I've got plates lining my entire arm that I'm eating from. And then like I'm setting my cup on my head because I love to eat. But anyway, yeah, so that makes sense. Like it's at the end of the day, the thing that you're doing has to be extremely unique. And I think that's kind of the name of the game. But
Yeah, in order to because again, remember what trademark and trade dress is that it's brand recognition. The public needs to recognize your brand when they see that logo or they see that design, when they see that Taco Bell, they see that Wendy's, they need to recognize it. And you cannot be falsely advertising the origin of goods. So that's really the name of the game, making it unique enough that people will understand that it came from you, that you designed it, that you organized this, that this was your mark that you put on the wedding.
right. Well, Leila, that I think that pretty much sums it up. We appreciate it so much you coming on the show and sharing your knowledge with us and actually doing case research. I haven't had a single guest on that has gone out and be like, Rob, I'm going to actually do some case research. So I really appreciate that. And actually what I'll do is I'm going to put the case, I'll put the case in the show notes, and also I'll have her information in the show notes. So if you are a wedding venue, if you're a planner or whoever that, and you're interested in trademarking your brand, or perhaps even possibly trademarking or protecting your design, then Leila is the woman for you. So I'll have her information in the show notes. And great, Leila, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a really great discussion.
So as I mentioned at the top of the show, we didn't get into this very much, but Leila is an attorney that represents people trying to get stolen art back. and which is such an interesting area of the law. She's kind of like an investigator and a lawyer all in one. And I'm sure it's very rewarding when she's successful in doing that. And I'm going to try to get her back on the show to talk about that a little bit, even though maybe it's not wedding law related. I just think that's such an interesting area of the law, that cultural heritage law, such an interesting area. But at any rate, I also want to have her back on the show because she has worked in the past with an organization called the Fashion Law Institute, which provides legal representation on intellectual property matters to the fashion world. So dress designers, shoe designers, these type of things. So a lot of interesting things to talk about in that space. So we'll probably have to have her on in the future. If you are enjoying the content of these episodes, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. Go to our YouTube channel at Wedding Industry Law, like and subscribe there. Leave a comment. If you got suggestions for content, let us know in some way. New episodes come out every week on Monday morning, and we sure hope to see you again. And with that, we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Wedding Industry Law Podcast. This podcast is intended for general information only. Nothing in this podcast is intended to be legal advice. Do not rely on this podcast for your legal matter. Instead, consult an attorney in your area. Thanks, obrigada, até semana que vem.